Welcome into another edition of the BrownZone.com Zone Coverage Podcast. My name is Andy Barch with AM 930 WEOL and 100.3 FM. Joined as always by Scott Petrak, Browns beat reporter with the Chronicle, Telegram, the Medina Gazette, and BrownZone.com. Scott, we're now one game into the NFL season, and unfortunately for Browns fans, an all too familiar sight, falling in the opener yesterday to the Baltimore Ravens. And Scott, I think the loss wasn't really the biggest problem here. I think there were a lot of people that predicted a Browns loss, but I don't know that anybody thought that it could go this bad, as the Browns just saw essentially nothing go their way yesterday.
Yeah, you're right, Bull. You knew it was going to be rough because, we've talked about it a billion times. Unique offseason, first-time head coach, installing new offensive and defensive systems, no preseason games, all those things, right? But you didn't think it would be that rough, and you didn't, at least I didn't think, and I think fans didn't hope, and Kevin Stefanski, the new coach, certainly didn't expect his team to make the number of huge mistakes that it made. And to me, that's a huge difference. Like, if they just lose the Ravens because the Ravens are a better team, which they are, right? They won the division last year. They went 14-2. They have the reigning MVP. Looks like he keeps getting better and better. If you just lose to that team, okay. But, when your quarterback throws an interception in the first drive, you're on a fake punt that doesn't work. You get 3 face mask penalties. Your best player, arguably Nick Chubb, fumbles. We can go down the line of your kicker misses 2 kicks. And some of those are physical things, right? Your kicker misses 2 kicks. I don't know if you blame the head coach for that. But there were plenty of things where you say, yeah, man, this team should have been better prepared, should have been more disciplined. And that's just troubling given a brand-new coach who you have higher expectations for. We saw it go so poorly with Freddie Kitchens, not only in his first game, but all season. Like, okay, breath of fresh air, this guy's smarter than Freddie. And then to lay that egg in week 1, it's a kind of a sobering dose of reality, and it doesn't mean it's going to be like that all season, and I think there are extenuating circumstances, but it didn't have to be that bad. So the fact that it was is troublesome.
Yeah, it's very troublesome, and I think we all certainly expected at least a little bit of improvement. We didn't see any of that yesterday, and when you see a final score of 38-6, you're immediately thinking to yourself, okay, was there anything that went right yesterday? Because it felt like when you give up 38 points, clearly not much went well defensively. I think we all saw a lot of the special teams miscues yesterday, missed extra point, missed field goal, and then you look at that offense. You only score 6 points. There are some major concerns there. We'll stay with the offensive side of things because there's just so much talent on that side of the ball. Scott, how concerned should Browns fans be about the offense? Do you think it's that bad, or do you think the Ravens are just that good?
I think it's a combination. I don't think we can argue with the talent on the offense. OBJ, Jarvis Landry, Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, Austin Hooper, David Njoku played well yesterday, which is a surprise to me when that happens. So they have plenty of talent. So I remain optimistic and even confident that the offense will figure it out. If that doesn't happen, then there's bigger questions, right? You question Kevin Stefanski's scheme, which I don't really question. Maybe you question Baker Mayfield, who, he wasn't the reason they lost yesterday, but he wasn't great. Missed some throws. I still thought he looked uncomfortable in the pocket at times. I mentioned the interception on the first drive. He just doesn't see 6'8" Calais Campbell dropping into coverage and throws where Campbell's standing and he tips it and, starts to change the game. It starts to snowball. But my point is the offense has everything it needs to be good this year, as long as Baker Mayfield plays well. Now, we didn't see that yesterday. Only 6 points, right? They had 1 touchdown. Even if you give them the field goal that Seibert missed later, maybe they should have scored 10 points. It's still nothing to write home about. What kind of confused me about yesterday's offensive performance was, we watched Kevin Stefanski last year when he was a coordinator with the Vikings. And he had that Gary Kubiak influence where they ran a bunch of the wide zone outside scheme And then they ran bootlegs off of it, and they ran play action and misdirection. And we didn't see a lot, if any, of that yesterday. The play actions were kind of straight ahead play action, and Baker would drop back in the pocket and throw. I felt like every time Baker was outside of the pocket, it's when he chose to scramble, to buy time, to get a better vision of the field. And he had some completions doing that. But I didn't see that, this 49ers ran it all the way to the Super Bowl. We saw Mike Shanahan run it forever. We saw Kyle Shanahan run it here in 2014, where the whole offensive line goes one way and the quarterback fakes the handoff and bootlegs the other way, and he's got a tight end running wide open. We just didn't see that yesterday, and I watched him practice it in training camp, so I know it's part of the system. I don't know if they just don't feel comfortable doing it yet because they didn't have a lot of training camp time, because center J.C. Treader wasn't able to practice it all during camp. I don't know if they were saving it for the Bengals and knew they were going to lose to the Ravens, so let's keep some things kind of in our back pocket for week 2. But that did surprise me when we talk about big picture offense. That surprised me because I kept waiting for those elements. Maybe Baltimore's defense and the scheme they run makes it harder to do that. But that surprised me, as well as just the general inability to sustain stuff. They ran the ball a little bit early and had some success. But then that kind of get taken away by the Ravens, and then they just weren't able to really mount anything, which is obviously disappointing given, like we talked about, all the weapons that they have on offense.
One of the biggest weapons that they've got on offense, some would argue the biggest, or at least the one with the most amount of talent, the one with the most amount of hype, would be Odell Beckham Jr., only a few grabs yesterday. And, of course, he had a really big drop towards the end of the first half because that would have gotten the Browns a first down. Instead, they've got to settle for a long field goal attempt, which they miss, and then the Ravens go right down the field and score. That essentially was the beginning of an avalanche that ended up being a 10-point swing. Scott, I think the more this name comes up, people are always going to wonder, how much longer is this going to be a situation where we constantly put that tag caution flammable on it? Because it just feels like this thing is going to blow up at some point if things don't start going right.
You're right. That's how it feels. And that's certainly the perception, Bo. Part of me wonders, is that kind of the outside creating that, right? We're always looking for him to explode, so does that just kind of prompt an explosion? And I don't know, because I do think that's part of Odell's, character is not the right word, personality. I think that's in him. I think we see the frustration come out. We saw it at times last year, although I thought he did a decent job managing it. If you remove the whole telling other teams to come get him thing, I thought in interviews with us, he handled it pretty well all year. He had kind of had Jarvis go to bat from a few times saying, hey, play calling. But we do know that Odell loves attention, right? It feels like he kind of courts drama. There's always something going on with Odell, and I don't think that's outside created. I think Odell either seeks that out or welcomes it or enables it, whatever the right word is. But, you look back at that game, and you mentioned the drop, and I look at 3 plays that it's like, Odell, why does that happen? He drops that ball on 3rd and 2, and we know how great his hands are. He drops that ball. There's a play in the 3rd quarter where he's not even, there's no defender near him, and he just steps out of bounds. And then he catches the ball, but it's incomplete because he had stepped out of bounds and not reestablished himself. That's just a brain cramp, and that shouldn't happen. I don't know if it was his first catch. I think it was his first catch. He catches a little bubble screen, and he gets a face mask trying to stiff arm the guy coming to tackle him. That doesn't need to happen. Those are 3 plays. You go, geez, Odell, you're hurting the team. Now, Baker missed him on throws, right? He had a skinny post, and Odell's running open, and Baker throws it behind him for an incompletion. He had a free play where there's an offside, and Baker overthrows him down the field. And they say, okay, well, if he caught a 50-yard touchdown there, do we think differently about his day? Maybe. He drew a couple of defensive penalties that led to first downs in the 3rd quarter. So those are good for Odell. So it's a mixed bag. But when you look at 3 for 10, 3 catches and 10 targets, 22 yards, obviously not good enough. And I was talking to my buddies, Baskin and Phelps, on the radio today, and Jeff Phelps was like, we talk about forcing the ball to Odell. But then you look around the league, and DeAndre Hopkins has 15 catches, or Julio Jones has that many catches, or Michael Thomas has that many catches. Teams give their best player, their best receiver, they throw the ball their way a bunch. So maybe it's not forcing. Maybe that should be part of the plan. But it always feels like with Odell, you're always wondering, man, he didn't get the ball early, so is he getting frustrated? And then when they do throw it to him and throw it to him time and time again, and it's not always a success, right? Either there's a drop or Baker misses him or the defender makes a play. Then you're like, man, why are they throwing it to Odell? They could be throwing it to Jarvis, or they could be handing it off to Chubb. Like, I think it's part of it is the way we look at it and the way we perceive it. But a big part of it is Odell's been here now for 17 games, and it just hasn't been what everyone expected and what it was for him early in his career at the Giants. So part of that's on Baker. Plenty of it's on Odell. And I do think it's on Kevin Stefanski to figure out the right ways to use Odell, because Freddie Kitchens never figured that out last year. And I think that was a big point of contention with OBJ. And now it's up to Stefanski, who's calling the plays, and it's his system to find the best ways to incorporate Odell. And, is that more bubble screens? Maybe you get the ball in his hands. Maybe it's, letting him run go routes and post routes, because we haven't seen a whole lot of deep shots to Odell. And I think last year you could say, well, he wasn't quite healthy. Well, he's healthy this year. So let him take the top off the defense. Let Baker throw one up and let Odell go get it, like we saw maybe the most famous play, if there is such a thing as the most famous play, in training camp. Well, Odell went up and out-jumped two defensive backs. Maybe give him a chance on some of those balls.
Well, moving forward and taking a look at what's on the horizon for the Browns this coming Thursday, they take on the Cincinnati Bengals, and Scott, I'm not quite sure if it's a blessing or if it's a curse for the Browns that they play very quickly after a performance like this. But one of the big questions going into a game like this, especially considering the year that we've all had, I think you hear a lot about how guys are going to be really dinged up 1 or 2 games into the season because they didn't have any scrimmages, and the Browns are already feeling the effects of that. So Jedrick Wills, the rookie out of Alabama, of course, is dinged up. Any idea as to what his status is and if he'll be available for Thursday?
Nothing official yet. I talked to 2 people after the game yesterday. One told me that the X-rays were negative, which is good because I think there was some concern that there was a broken bone in his leg. And then I talked to somebody else who said the initial thought is it's not serious. So maybe it's just a bruise. We don't have the final word yet. Maybe we get it today. So I don't want to rule him out yet for Thursday night. I think there's a chance he plays, which will be big for the Browns because you want him to get as much experience as possible. I thought he played pretty well against the Ravens. He had one holding penalty, but Baker wasn't pressured a ton. They gave help. The coaching staff gave help. They kept in tight ends and backs sometimes, but I thought they managed that well for, Jedrick never played on a left tackle before and not having a preseason. So you want him in the lineup. I think there's reason to think he might be in the lineup Thursday night. Jacob Phillips, the rookie linebacker, looks like he's out. He had his leg immobilized after the game yesterday. We don't know about David Njoku yet. But you're right, it's a quick turnaround. And again, is it good? Yeah, it's good that they don't have to live with the Ravens' loss for a whole week. It's bad if Jedrick needs a couple of extra days, right? Conceivably, J.C. Treader would be better off with a couple extra days, but he knew of the quick turnaround. But also, then you got to fix all these mistakes, right? There's a ton of things to fix, and the Browns are going to practice like once for real this week. They might get through a walkthrough today. They'll do another walkthrough Wednesday. But Tuesday's the only day they practice. Certainly they won't be in pads. So you got to figure out a bunch of stuff without having much practice. And you're playing a Bengals team that, lost a close one to the Chargers yesterday. Probably could have won. They missed a field goal late. And I think there was an offensive pass interference that took away a touchdown. It might have been the game winner. And you got the number 1 pick in the draft in Joe Burrow. So, it's too early to say it's a must-win. But this is a huge game for Kevin Stefanski in this season, right? We talked about it last week, Bull, how with all the growing pains that I expect, you got to keep your head above water till things calm down, till you find a little bit of a groove, till you settle in. Well, the only way you can keep your head above water is by winning some games. You can't start out 0-4 or 1-5. The season just gets away from you, even if you play much better in the second half. So you need to win some games early, and weeks 2 and 3 seem like winnable games. Home against Cincinnati, home against Washington. If you're not 1-1 after Thursday and you're 0-2, it's going to be really tough to climb out of that hole, and the pressure will just ratchet up on Kevin Stefanski. We're not talking about the pressure of whether or not he gets fired. We're just talking about keeping this team together, moving forward, trying to gain some optimism, do things right, because the schedule is going to get harder, and you just can't afford not to pick up that first win, especially against a team that drafted number 1 overall last year, does have a rookie quarterback, and is coming into your place for a primetime game.
Sure. And I think most Browns fans would tell you they could stomach losing to a team with the Ravens as good as they are and as much talent as they've got, as experienced as they are. It would be a lot tougher to stomach a loss at home on Thursday night to the Bengals after getting destroyed by the Ravens in the opener. So you're right, this Thursday is a big one, no doubt about that. But having said all that, Scott, the Bengals look pretty respectable on Sunday. So this isn't going to be as easy as I think many thought it might have been on paper going into the season. What are some of the key matchups for Thursday night's game?
You're right, Bull. And I will mention, the Browns are 6-point favorites was the early line I saw. So at least Vegas thinks they're still better than the Bengals. Now, that's not a huge spread, especially when you get the home game bump, which I assume there's still a home game bump even without a bunch of fans in the stands. But I'm not guaranteed how Vegas was looking at that. You got to talk about Joe Burrow, and I didn't see a ton of that game yesterday. I need to go back and watch it. I saw some highlights, and I know he's a threat running the ball. Right, he had a long touchdown run on a quarterback draw. Browns had trouble containing Lamar Jackson yesterday. He only ran for I think 45 yards, but he got outside the pocket. And they definitely changed their defense to not let him run a ton. So do you play protective like that because you're worried about Burrow running and let him sit in the pocket? I don't think so. I think you need to rush him and try to get after the rookie, but then you got to be aware if he escapes the pocket or they call a planned draw like he ran yesterday. Your linebackers have to be paying attention so he doesn't kill you with his legs. Joe Mixon, right, the running back, just signed a long extension with the Bengals. The Browns are okay against the run yesterday overall, but it's so many other things go poorly on defense. They might have just committed everybody to the run and let guys run wide open behind them like Mark Andrews and Marquise Brown. So I think they'll be more traditional trying to stop the run, and it'll be tough because Mixon's a good player. And we know this Browns run defense historically has been bad. So that's the first thing I would watch for. And you got A.J. Green back, Denzel Ward. I think he had a good game yesterday. They threw it his way a bunch. The Ravens didn't. So you hope, that's a good matchup to watch. Green's more physical than Denzel is. So those are the first things that jump at me. And then, the Bengals have always had a good defensive line. How does this Browns unit hold up against them? Especially even if Jedrick Wills is in or if he's not, how does Kendall Lamb do in replacement? Those are the things that jump out to me right away about, okay, what are the Browns going to have to do better to, have a different outcome against Cincinnati?
And we've kind of covered what a win might do in worst-case scenario, how detrimental a loss would be in this whole scenario. So I think it goes without saying that it's not must-win, as you said, but it's a big one for the Browns, no question about it. Well, Scott, as far as covering the game went yesterday, I think everybody's got a different idea as to how they feel like the game could be covered or should be covered with the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's affected everybody so differently. I know that as far as the baseball games have been concerned, people have said, yeah, it's a little bit different, but you kind of get used to it. What was it like covering the game yesterday and only having access with Zoom calls and things like that for the post-game interviews?
Yeah, it was certainly different. I did not go to Baltimore. I think I've been covering this team, or actually since '99 I've been going to Baltimore. I think maybe I haven't made one or two trips to Baltimore. So that's a game I normally would cover. But we're not traveling. It doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to travel when all the interviews are on Zoom. There's no atmosphere to pay attention to, right, because there's no fans in the stands in Baltimore. So I've watched other games at home because I haven't traveled to every game since I've been on this beat. But usually when they're on the road, I watch it, and then I'm done. Right? You don't have to write. You don't have to do the interviews. I listen to everything. But this is different because I feel like I can cover it the same way because all the interviews are on Zoom. You don't have to be in the locker room. I'm not missing anything by not being in the locker room. So it's just different. You have less access, number one, because in a locker room you can talk to 20 guys, right? This time the Browns decide who we're going to talk to. Now, we can request guys, but it's still whoever chooses to talk to us, number one. And I think there were 5 players to talk yesterday, which is a decent amount for Zoom, but it's not like an open locker room after a game. You get heated emotions. You get guys, they're good talkers, and they know they have to talk. And if you walk up to them, they do talk, but they're not going to stop for a Zoom. Like Odell probably would have talked yesterday, and he would have talked about the drop, and he would have talked about 3 for 22. Instead, he doesn't talk. So that's a big difference. Just little stuff like a couple of my colleagues were texting. You don't have they hand out stats after every quarter, and they're just handy, right? You can refer to them. Oh, this guy did this guy did that. The play-by-play you have in front of you. Now, you can find that online, but it's just different, The game book, you have all the stats, and if you have, I'm sure nobody on this listening to this has covered an NFL game, but at the end of the game, they hand out what's called the game book, and it's thick. I don't know if it's 20 pages, and it's just full with stats and play-by-play and all kinds of information. And that's, when we go down to the locker room, we come back up and you grab the game book. Well, there's no game book to grab. You can find it online, but again, it's different. Interviews on Zoom are different, and we're getting used to those, but after a game, it's still different. You got to raise your hand, and then it's tough to follow up. There's just so many things. And again, this is not me griping, because these are the least of problems that everybody in the world is dealing with the pandemic. I'm just saying how it is different. And here's a minor one. I always chart which skill players are on the field for each play for the Browns. So it'll be, I write 80 for Landry, 13 for Beckham, just to see, are they running 2 running backs? Are they going 3 tight ends? And when you only get the TV views, it's tough to do that because they don't always show you the pre-snap formation. Sometimes they're showing highlights. Sometimes they're doing other stuff. So you don't always have all the information you do when you're in the press box looking down. So it's different. I'm sure we'll get used to it. It'll be nice to be back at the stadium Thursday night, see what kind of atmosphere there is with the 6,000 fans at First Energy Stadium. A night game, so that'll be another thing with the deadline pressure. But it definitely was weird, but that's the way it's going to be. I think, maybe Cincinnati and Pittsburgh, maybe I'll drive there. But if not, I'll be watching from home and covering from home because it's almost the same access as if you're there with all the Zoom interviews.
Yeah, it'll be different for sure. And I know many Browns fans are hoping that the outcome is different on Thursday night as opposed to what they witnessed on Sunday. Well, Scott, before we let you go, I know that you'll probably be writing about this in the coming days, but with the Browns opening up as a 6-point favorite, any idea as to how you see this thing turning out?
That's a good question, Bull. The optimist in me and the guy who picked 8-8 is probably going to pick them to win. It's not like I've lost all confidence in Kevin Stefanski, and I know how kind of startling that outcome was yesterday, and I'm not diminishing that at all. I understand it, and it's making me reevaluate some things about this team. But I'm not ready to reevaluate everything. They should be a better team than the Bengals. It is at home. I think they're more talented than the Bengals. So, yeah, they should win this game. I'm going to pick them to win this game. I can't say right now if I'm going to pick them to cover the spread or not. I don't know if I'll pick a real close one or have them winning by, 7 or 8.
Going to be interesting in the coming days here to see what kinds of things are said and done as the Browns try and fix some of those issues that we saw on Sunday. Scott, as always, great to catch up with you, and hopefully next week we're talking about a much different outcome.
Sounds good. Appreciate it, Bull.
Thank you, Scott. Again, that's Scott Petrak, Browns beat reporter with the Chronicle, Telegram, the Medina Gazette, and, of course, at brownzone.com. That's going to wrap up another edition of the brownzone.com Zone Coverage Podcast. For Scott Petrak, this is Andy Barch saying thank you again for tuning in. We'll talk to all of you again next week.